Thank you, everybody. We're going to move on with the program, but did want to take a brief moment to express some gratitude. Foremost, to everybody in the room. Thank you so much for your participation in what has been a long but I understand exhausting day, so thank you for making the trek out here and joining with us. I'll do one clap to cue when you're supposed to applaud. We can get through that. There are four very important constituent parts to this forum. We started the Reagan National Defense Forum. We wanted to bring the entire national defense community together, and that really breaks down between industry leaders, which we have here today, between members of Congress who are here, the senior civilian leadership in the Pentagon, and our military leadership as well. So please join me in thanking them for their participation today. I want to give a special shout out, even though I'm a House staffer and worked for Chairman Buck McKeon and Chairman Thornberry, a special shout out for the senators. They were voting on the Senate floor up at 2 a.m. East Coast time last night, and as you saw, they got on a flight early this morning and joined us for lunch and have been active participants throughout the day, so round of applause to the senators. I just want everybody to take note that you may recognize people in the room for those you worked with in the National Security Council or in industry or in the Pentagon, but there are a lot of young up-and-comers, people right now who are on college campuses interested in national security, young people in industry, others who wanted to be here today so they get exposure to the issues facing our national defense community. Part of the mission of this forum is to give them that exposure, to allow them to interact, so that in 10 years, 15 years' time, yes, John Hybush, when we do the 25th Reagan National Defense Forum, those people will be sitting on the stage, so we appreciate your participation and welcome you back next year. I'm going to give special acknowledgement to the staff of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute who go beyond what you can imagine to put this thing together. Please, a special round of applause for them. And in particular, I want to acknowledge my colleagues on the executive committee, Ms. Shala Seaborn on the executive committee. Where's Shala? Over there. No one ever sees Shala, but everybody hears from her. And then Bob Cochran, my battle buddy. We started this and pitched this idea to the other member of the executive committee, John Hybush, was now 6 years ago, and Bob really put this whole thing together. Thank you, Bob Cochran. I do want to acknowledge the trustees here in the room today. Really exciting, and we'll talk more about them shortly, but Secretary George Shultz for participating throughout the day early on last night, and it's just a thrill to have you here and for your support amongst other trustees for the Defense Forum. So great to see you. Thank you for being here. Michael Castine is here again. We really appreciate his support. Thank you, Michael. And Governor Wilson also, I had a chance to sit with him at lunch today. The trustees of the library have been major supporters and back this event, and we really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to introduce the next person to tell you about something very special we're about to do. It is the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute, John Hybush. We talked about risk throughout the day. He took a bet on this forum 6 years ago, and sometimes it's worth taking a risk. Right, John? Thank you for being here.
Great. Thanks, Bob. You know, sometimes you get signals crossed, and Roger and I did, because he just introduced the three people I was going to welcome here. But kidding aside, I want to thank Roger. He thanks some others, but you wouldn't be here if Roger hadn't put his blood, sweat, and tears into this for years. So thank you, Roger, very much. Fortunately for you all, this is going to be my absolute shortest introduction of the evening. I have one person left that I want at this moment welcome to the stage, and that is someone everyone here knows quite well, and we owe a great deal to as a country, and that is our House Armed Services Committee Chairman, Mac Thornberry. Mac.
As everyone has heard, this is the 5th annual Reagan Defense Forum. And it has been such a success that you would think that it just sprung out of the air, or at least sprung out of the aura of President Ronald Reagan. The truth is, the success over the last 5 years has been due to several factors. It starts with the Reagan Library and the Reagan Foundation. It includes the generous sponsors who make this possible. It also includes the participants and attendees and all of those conversations that you're able to have that are not on the stage or in the audience. But even if you had all of those things, all of those elements together, it still took a spark to make it happen, to get this thing started. And that spark was provided by my predecessor as chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon. And so the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute has decided to present its Ronald Reagan Distinguished Service Award to Chairman Howard P. Buck McKeon for his vision, for his leadership, and for his hard work in rolling up his sleeves and getting this thing started and getting it started on the right foot. Please join me in thanking and in welcoming Buck McKeon.
I had a very extensive speech written out here. Listed some of the people that I wanted to thank, and Roger thanked most of them. John thanked Mac. And I would like to just thank all of you for coming here, for being here, for all of what you do for the defense of this great nation. Because all of those that were listed do a tremendous amount for our men and women in uniform every day, and we can't thank you enough for that great devotion to them. There's one other group I think hasn't been mentioned that I wanted to thank, and that is the media. You know, they have been here each time. They do a great job of moderating these panels, and I think have done a great job. And the last one that we just had, that was great. You know, you can't do what we do here, I think, anywhere else. And we get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But in you know, when you're talking about intelligence, you can't give all the secrets away. But really, thank you all for being here, and all of us owe a debt of gratitude to Ronald and Nancy Reagan for those great words, peace through strength, because to him they weren't just words. It was what we need to do. We need to get back to that. We need to be so strong, as Eisenhower said, that nobody ever dares attack us. And the last one I want to thank is Patricia. Thank you.
Well done. Well done. Okay, you got to get right here.
Picture thing? Yeah. Oh.
1, 2, and 3. Don't forget to smile. 1, 2, and 3.
Terrific. Yeah. Well, congratulations, Buck, for a truly well-deserved award. It's my pleasure now to introduce the keynote speaker for our closing session, Deputy Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan. A holder of 2 advanced degrees from MIT, Deputy Secretary Shanahan took on his current assignment after accumulating an enormous wealth of experience in critical defense systems. He served for 3 decades at Boeing, where he was in charge of critical missile defense systems. This included projects such as the ground-based mid-course defense system, the airborne laser, and the advanced tactical laser. He was also in charge of rotorcraft systems, overseeing the company's U.S. Army aviation assets, including the Apache, the Chinook, and the Osprey program. Also, as Senior Vice President for Commercial Airplane Programs, he oversaw Boeing's world-renowned commercial aircraft fleet from the 737 all the way to the company's magnificent 787 Dreamliner. Now, spearheading what might be the largest spending increases and growth in the U.S. military since the Reagan years, we are honored to have him with us today. I'd like you to please join me in welcoming Deputy Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan.
Yeah. How are you? Good. Yeah, I'd say those 30 years were a good warm-up act. John, thank you, and I'm going to make sure to get a copy of your book on the way out of town here. So thank you for that warm introduction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in today's dynamic world, strong leadership is more critical than ever. I cannot picture a crowd more in tune with the importance of good leadership than this one. It is my first time here, but many of you have been coming to this event for years. The beauty of the forum is its ability to draw together such invested, knowledgeable, and diverse leaders from the executive branch, military services, Congress, industry, our allies and partners, and the media. It's a privilege to speak with you on a topic as vital as national security. And I am mindful that it has been a long and productive day, Roger, not exhaustive, so I aim to keep my remarks brief. In my time at DoD, I've already interacted with many of you. You're not a passive bunch. The phrase full contact sport is definitely not lost on you. I've had the good fortune to interact with President Trump. He has been clear on his expectations. Build a stronger military. Take care of our men and women in uniform, and excel in the management of our business operations. Secretary Mattis and I appreciate your endeavors to address a critical facet of our national security, military readiness. This bipartisan effort bridges the political spectrum. In one ear, I hear Senator Reid rightly asserting our need for a well-trained, properly equipped military force that can deploy on a moment's notice. In my other ear, Chairman Thornberry, urging of our moral responsibility to meet the readiness challenge. Today, it is inspiring to join this large team of sharp minds working to confront reality and identify opportunities. And I look forward to the action today's discussions will foster. I've been in my role as Deputy Secretary of Defense for 4.5 months now. The transition from more than 30 years in the private sector has been surprisingly smooth and seamless. The environment is similar, but with higher stakes. It's a large organization tasked with serious decisions on safety and security. I will say, a couple of the department's behaviors strike me as abnormal. First, operating without a budget is not normal. Doing so every year for 9 years is really not normal. Next, Airplanes are meant to fly. A service with significant number of its airplanes grounded and awaiting maintenance is not normal. Part of my job as a leader is guarding against the normalization of abnormal behaviors within the department. A high level of performance is not only expected of our military, it is essential for America's security, no matter the constraints. As Secretary Mattis often says, there is nothing new under the sun. And we do not have to look far into the past to find another time when our military faced serious obstacles to readiness and modernization. 80 years ago, we faced rapidly evolving threats from across the Pacific and the Atlantic. While military leaders sought stable funding, political tensions and budgetary pressures stymied readiness efforts until the Second World War arrived on our doorstep. In 1938, General George Marshall captured the dangers of unpreparedness in a way that still strikes a chord. War is sudden and a terrible business. We must be prepared to defend ourselves, and almost every War Department problem involves consideration of dollars and cents. Today, artificial constraints still hold our national defense hostage. From budget stresses like continuing resolutions and Budget Control Act caps, to disagreements in Congress that affect timely decision-making. Right now, we have time, one of our most precious resources, but we lack the stable budget needed to prepare for future fights. In a crisis, Congress will undoubtedly fund us for conflict, but we will lack the time to prepare. Let's heed General Marshall's warning. We cannot rely on a crisis to be the catalyst for solutions. The cost of global conflict is simply too high, and we value our men and women in uniform far too much. A rapidly changing global security environment and budgetary instability have forced our department into a risk management posture, the consequences of which are hard to calculate. For any fellow engineers in the room, let me draw a physics analogy. According to Hooke's law, elastic materials bounce back to their original shape after stresses are removed from their environment. But if stress exceeds a certain limit, the materials will fail to regain their original shape. They become permanently deformed. The Department of Defense has its limits to elasticity. Excessive pressure in the form of budgetary instability has the potential to permanently distort our department's character and lessen the lethality. I know from my experience in industry just how long it can take to build a culture of excellence. Therefore, as a department, we must shift our focus from risk management to seizing opportunities in order to remain competitive. A risk-balanced, opportunity-driven approach will spark innovation and help protect our hard-earned culture of excellence from the unintended distortion of budgetary instability. To address these challenges, our forthcoming National Defense Strategy, nested under the National Security Strategy, and our fiscal year 19 budget are designed to sustain long-term readiness and modernization. We are building alignment across the department, the interagency, with industry, and other partners and allies. We all view these efforts through the critical lenses of lethality and affordability. After all, we must remember the department's primary purpose is to be as lethal as possible, ensuring our diplomats continue to speak from a position of strength. This is only possible when our enemies know with certainty that that we are ready to fight and win our wars, and our allies know that America stands steady alongside them. A stable budget is essential for this. As I alluded to earlier, I'm struck by the talent in this room. As individuals, you possess no shortage of skills and resources. Our challenge then is harnessing individual talent into one team effort, embodying the true nature of our nation's guiding principle, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. I know we can succeed if we stay focused on our goal, winning against any adversary to keep America safe. I close with General Washington's wisdom. To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. This belief drives us and will continue to drive us in all we do. Thank you. Good. Good. Yeah. All right, good.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Let's welcome CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr for a discussion with the Secretary. Barbara.
That's better. Thank you, gentlemen. I just want to take 2 seconds and say this is my 5th time here, and I always...
You're not live yet. Yeah.
Mic'd up? Okay.
You probably started pushing some of those buttons.
All right. I'm on TV. I'm supposed to know how to do this.
Okay. Hi.
I always enjoy coming out here because I just have to say, my very first newspaper job, way too many years ago, I'm not going to admit to, was just down the road at the Thousand Oaks News Chronicle. I was the City Planning Commission reporter for, for about $8,600 a year. And my big goal was to be promoted to City Council reporter. Never happened. So you see what happened to me. I also briefly want to say, because Senator Reed's in the audience, I think everyone at this forum, I was privileged a couple of years ago to host a panel with Senator McCain. We always want to make sure we send all of us our very best wishes to Senator McCain. If you could tell him. And now let the interrogation begin. No.
Hi. Yeah.
So, let's face it, not a lot of people, know everything about you yet.
That's good. Yeah. Surprises, right?
I want to keep it that way. So talk to us a little bit about how you got here in terms of what now. Talk to us about being the Chief Operating Officer, essentially. Talk to us about how you and Secretary Mattis divide up the Pentagon, divide up the world, priorities, what he wants you to accomplish.
No, absolutely. So it's probably last February I get a phone call, and it's Kevin Sweeney. He's the Chief of Staff for Secretary Mattis. And I think it's a fraternity friend of my son. It's like, why would the Secretary of Defense's Chief of Staff be calling me? And it was for a job interview. And I went to the Pentagon, and I went to the Secretary's office, and he has this round desk, and it was General Sherman's desk. And we were doing a job interview, and we were going back and forth, and I asked him in the job interview, what is it that you'd like to accomplish in your time as Secretary of Defense so that I can understand if I have the skill set to complement what it is you want to achieve? And the first thing he said was, I want to make a more lethal force, and I think you have the background in developing major weapons systems to help lead the department. And then he said, we can't be the policeman to the world. I need to have a partner who understands, who's worked at a global company that has those kinds of perspectives and understands the value of international relationships. And the third one was the one that surprised me the most. He said, one of my goals is that when I leave the department, that people will want to come and benchmark the Department of Defense because it has best practices. And when he described it that way, I said, I think I possess the skill set. It was never intended that I would be his policy deputy. It was always help me restructure the Pentagon. Your job is down and in, and his is up and out.
You got right to it because in the press corps, we hear Secretary Mattis talk a lot about he feels his job is making sure the U.S. military is the most lethal force in the world. Lethality. Lethality takes us right to the very, perhaps, key question. Does that necessarily mean a bigger military? Is a bigger military the only route to lethality? More, let me just say, help people understand, is the thinking, yes, we need more nuclear weapons, we need more aircraft, more ships, planes, satellites. Is that the route to increase lethality?
Well, I think the way, at least I've been thinking about increased lethality, it's size and capability, it's both. How you use your force structure, how you use the capability can be a multiplier. There's all sorts of ways to create different types of effects, so there's not a magic answer as to what the mix is. You can generate more capability from what we already have today, and things that we can do with innovation and technology can really enable those forces to do even more.
So if a service comes to you, if a major contractor comes to you, somebody comes to you with an idea and they say it's innovative and it just means we need, I'm just hypothesizing here, we need, another 200 fighter jets. That may not be, just more may not be the answer.
Well, more of the same means more of the same. We need more better.
Tie lethality and innovation together, because I know
Well,
that's where you're looking.
Yeah, the really neat part about this job is that we get to set the future, and it'll be much different than what we've done for the last several decades. It's kind of back to the conversation. I think when John was doing his introduction, we're looking at one of the biggest changes since the Reagan years. And I worked on the Chinook that came into introduction the same year I was born. The Apache was in that vintage. We have a lot of really great legacy equipment. The B-52, think of the missions we've been able to enable there. I think we're at an interesting period of history where innovations like computing, we always talk about things like machine learning or artificial intelligence, it'll fundamentally change decision making. So the systems that we have in the future will take advantage of that. Autonomy, I think you'll see that to a much greater degree. There are very few people in this room that would have predicted a few years ago that the automotive companies would be getting out of combustion engines at the turn of the next decade, or that people wouldn't want to own cars because they'll drive themselves. I think we're at the same point where we'll usher in a new age of technology. It's not about a company or a person coming forward with a new idea. We have to harness the industrial base so that iterating on those ideas and scaling those ideas becomes a natural act. And making that shift right now will be difficult.
And why is that in your view?
Because many of these technologies are at their infancy. I mean, you see that in cars, you see that in autonomous aircraft, but this will change very, very rapidly. And you're seeing it with robotics, you're seeing it with additive manufacturing. What's hard for people today is because we haven't had experience using these technologies is to envision how we might do things differently. So the trick with innovation is to use it and then to fail 1,000 times quickly. And I think that's where human beings struggle. The desire to fail is uncomfortable.
Do you see more opportunity in commercial technology for the department?
I think about commercial technology this way. So before, the commercial market leveraged government investment. Now, because the commercial segment is investing so much money, it's time for the government to do the opposite. I call it a new form of R&D, rip off and deploy. So let's leverage somebody else's investment. Our real challenge is that we've created a really neat acquisition system that says we have to go through a whole bunch of extra hoops to prove that something that already works under our standards. That's, the big opportunity for us is to be able to take all of that and shelve a good portion of it and then leverage somebody else's money.
You and I have talked about this whole issue of risk and elasticity. Let me come to it from just the very opposite side. Yeah, it takes the Pentagon a long time to develop things. Is too long? That's for others to decide.
It's too long.
Okay. Where is your thinking about where risk crosses the line into being too risky, not appropriate risk either because it may put troops at risk, it may be a waste of money? That, help people understand where your thinking is on this.
Yeah, well, so maybe just a couple examples come to mind. The easy one is this, like on autonomous aircraft, right? So how much risk would you be willing to take on a autonomous aircraft that would haul material for logistics that wouldn't have a person in it? You'd take a lot more risk than if there was a person, in that vehicle. I think where people's lives are at stake is probably where you have a greater degree of conservatism. When I think about risk, there's like 3 dimensions to it. There's technical risk, there's cost risk, and schedule risk. And so you have to understand which piece of this you're trying to exploit. So the real danger is when you do all 3. And technology risk. I mean, this is the one that excites me the most. Is that we have some of the smartest people in the world in our country, in our industrial base, and in the Department of Defense. When we talk about why things take too long, it's because of the way we hand things over. It's much like if we were a baseball team and we had this farm league and people would go from single A to double A to triple A. I know you love all these sports analogies. But we would find a person who was in high school who could throw a 100-mile-an-hour curveball with each hand, and they'd get to the big leagues when they were 40. Our challenge isn't that we don't have good ideas. Our challenge is our process makes it go really slow. And this gets back to this notion of innovation and risk. Nobody wants to make a mistake in public.
So when the services, either the secretaries or the chiefs, come to you as you work through the next budget cycle, as you work through various efforts, what do you want to hear from them when they come talk to you about their programs, what they're trying to achieve, what kind of funding they're looking for? What are the priority things you want to hear from the services and the chiefs?
Well, we've already had those discussions, so they're ongoing all the time. It's
well, tell everyone else.
Yeah.
We all want to know.
Yeah. No. It's pretty exciting.
Because you're obviously not willing to just look at some piece of paper with a spreadsheet and a bunch of numbers on it. You want to hear some stuff.
What do you think? No, not yet.
Which one of the chiefs are you looking at
Yeah.
as you say this?
I'm looking at the Chief of Staff of the Army. Yeah. No.
Do we need to explain this? What do you want to hear from them as the services pitch to you and the secretary about where they want to go?
Well, it's not so much what I want to hear from them. It's how are we going to partner together to achieve these results. I mean, whether it's General Goldfein or General Milley, this notion that we're going to take all these authorities and say, General Milley, go develop the next combat vehicle. You've spent your whole life, doing military operations. Now we want you to design the future of military vehicles for the Department of Defense. My role is to help us not be insular, but to be able to almost take all those ideas. I think what I'm looking most for is not just the ideas. They have the authority in their position to change how people think about the future. And if they possess we're going to extend the status quo, then those meetings will be uncomfortable. If the meeting is, here's how we're going to fundamentally change, then we get into this discussion of experimentation. And no one is reckless. I think it gets down to how do we get the right people in the room and do the right level of experimentation.
And to begin to wrap up, none of this, of course, is done in a vacuum because you plan against essentially a threat. You plan against the fact that somebody out there may do something bad. So how do you view right now the threat, but not getting so caught up in the day-to-day threat that it hinders the innovation, which is the longer view? So how do you view, I mean, we talked about it all day here, North Korea, Russia. What concerns do you have that you can get positioned for those kind of threats and the threats that nobody, of course, sees coming?
Right. So if you're in the Department of Defense, you live in this duality. So you have, one eyeball, what's in front of you, and then you have one, down the road. The reason I mentioned in my speech about time is if we're going to develop these new capabilities, we're not going to do them in 2 or 3 or 4 years. They'll take more than 5 years. And the lens that this is from working in industry, the lens that I apply to, whether you want to call it threats or competitions, is it's not about beating your competitor. It's really about, can you do the mission? Can you service your customer? Can you create the value? Your competition tells you kind of where someone else is in their capability, but I think, Chairman Thornbury, you said it best this morning, it's all about us. What are we doing? What do we have to do to be better? So our time is being really spent evaluating those threats, but then coming up with, I'll call it, the surprise. It's not about how I'm going to beat you, it's understanding what you're capable of, but how do I do something even greater than that? But if you don't focus on if you're focused on your competition, you'll fail in your mission. That's what drives my thinking as we go through and assess the roadmap for modernization.
I think we're running close to the end here. If you weren't in the morning session, the new Chief of Staff of the Army appears to be General David Goldfein. I just want everybody to know that. We'll end the day on a note of humor. He was introduced at that. No one has exactly had the nerve to call General Milley yet and tell him. But General Goldfein might in a little while. Thank you. I know that we have time for one question. I believe, yes, there you are, sir. As a native of California, growing up here, it's a real honor. It's nice to meet you. And I know that you have a question for the Deputy Secretary.
Thank you, Barbara. I do. And Mr. Secretary, at the National Defense Forum last year, the question was raised in one of the panels that rather than being concerned about rebuilding the Department of Defense, the department's reformers should be concerned primarily with reforming it. And they posed it as a choice. I don't know that you will want to treat it in that way, but would you care to tell us what is the Trump position on rebuild or reform?
Well, in the conversations I've had with Secretary Mattis, it's to do both simultaneously. We can lay the foundation for the future and we can rebuild because we have the time and we have the smarts. Beautiful thing about the Department of Defense, when you kind of just look at the skill, people have stayed in the military. Joe McMaster, you talked about this. The depth of skill and experience from war is tremendous. So yeah, we have to extract that knowledge and build on that. And the reform piece is, to me, hygiene. We just have to do it. I mean, it's a matter of any successful organization must be in a must be continuously reformed. We call it continuous improvement. You always have to be improving. If I had, and I talked to Secretary Mattis about this quite a bit. Our goal, the big worry is you can bring people in, but they leave. How do you make sure that the changes are enduring? How do you make sure that they sustain themselves? So part of what we've been working on are these reforms, and then to put the management system in place that ensures that we continuously improve. So I'm bullish on the fact that we can walk and chew gum. I'm bullish on the fact that there's a lot of opportunity on the reform side that'll pay for the modernization efforts that we're going to undertake. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think I'll leave you with this last thought. If you're going to have one of those cool meetings on experimentation and innovation with the chiefs, and you feel like inviting the Pentagon press corps in.
Okay, yeah, no, you know where we are. Yeah. Take notes. Yeah, record this.
Yeah, we'd be happy to turn up.
Absolutely. Great.
We promise to behave.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, appreciate it.
We
Thanks, Barbara.
appreciate it.
Yeah, okay, good.